Yeah, from the Big Easy to the open road, this is Road Gangs Radio, broadcasting live from the Passport Studios with your host, Jimmy Mack. Let's get to Tat.
Hey, man. First of all, big thanks to our friends from Passport. They've been out there solving America's toughest recruiting and workforce challenges through research, technology, and people. From registered apprenticeships to veteran readiness, you can learn more at passport.com or go to nationalapprenticeship.org. By the way, really quickly, just want to let you know that if you actually do break down and find yourself out on that lonesome road and you got your phone on you, go to truckdown.com. They serve all 50 states and the 8 provinces. What they do is they connect maintenance providers with folks who actually find themselves in a little bit of need. Go to truckdown.com. They've been doing it since 97. Incredibly well trusted. If you're on the road and find yourself alone, truckdown.com. If you're on the road and find yourself alone or you see somebody who is all alone, you might want to get in touch with our friends at TAT. Micah Larsen joins us this morning. It's the first time TAT has been on Road Gang Radio. They've been a part of RadioNemo.com, The Dave Nemo Show, Dave Nemo Entertainment, and all permutations of that since the very beginning. We're thrilled to have them on. Micah, good morning. How you been?
Hey, good morning, Jimmy. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fine. But before we actually get to more serious issues and some heroic issues here, too, because we're going to be talking about heroes today, the book we're looking at later on in the show is the 501 Essential Albums of the 80s. And to kind of give you a sense of how comprehensive it is, Dre will love this. So we're right by the Jazz Fest in our new studios. The album I'm looking at is the Neville Brothers' Fio on the Bayou, and it is right next to the Psychedelic Furs' Talk, Talk, Talk as two of the most essential albums of the 1980s. When I ask you about the 80s, by the way, and there's a music connection here I want to get to with Tat. When I ask you about the 80s, is there an 80s album that really kind of gets your blood flowing, your juices going, your imagination stirred?
Oh, man. If I had to think of an 80s album that really does it, I think it's probably Thriller by Michael Jackson.
Oh, it lands, brother. It lands. It lands. By the way, I'm a big fan of that song for 2 reasons. One, John Landis's video is terrific, but let's all admit it, that our good friend Vincent Price, the beginning of his second great act, the one that leads him directly into Edward Scissorhands, I think you can make a case that Thriller is ground zero for the beginning of Vincent Price's grand return. I bring up music, too, by the way, because Dave was talking about this, people arriving in Nashville, kids with dreams. It's often in the music industry, people get targeted and they end up finding themselves in a very, very bad situation. On the flip side of that, though, as you're going to talk about today, there are people who are looking out for those kids as well. People who just keep their eyes open, work with law enforcement, keep that sphere of influence open to say, hey, maybe you should go over to the shelter and get yourself a place to stay tonight. Maybe you should go get a hot cup of coffee at the youth center this afternoon, this evening, rather than, hanging out down at that bar hoping your dreams come true. Maybe you should get a foundation before you get lost in the big city. The Harriet Tubman Award is very, very aptly named. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so absolutely. TAT's Harriet Tubman Award is a prestigious honor that we give out annually, and nominations for the award close at the end of July. But the award includes a $5,000 check and honors members of the trucking, bus, and energy industries whose actions have helped recover or improve the lives of victims or prevent human trafficking or sexual exploitation from taking place. So, when people talk about human trafficking, I think a fair question that comes up is, how can we tell that anti-human trafficking training is really working? And, because human trafficking is such a complex crime, I think that's a really hard question to give a straightforward answer to. But awards like the Harriet Tubman Award are just a constant example that the work that we do does have a lasting impact on people and helps save lives. And the proof is in our ability to be able to tell these stories through our presentations and on our website, through our mission, and, et cetera.
The other thing, too, is the fact that, and I'm going to actually stand up for what I call quiet grace, or people who simply just nudge things in the right direction. A lot of people see a lot of despair and a lot of hopelessness out there in the world, and they want to do something big, something impressive, something heroic. And I get that urge. But I feel like we need to remind people that sometimes being like, seeing somebody getting hassled in a parking lot and walking over and just being like, "Hey, man, I got your meal ready. What are you doing talking to this guy?"
Right.
Let's go sit down in here real quick at the counter. The waitress, we all know you over here. We'd love to have you sit back down and come get your meal and just sit there with these little tiny things. Not the gunfight at the OK Corral, not a confrontation in a parking lot, but sometimes just being kind of cognizantly aware of the world around you can make such a difference in the lives of many young men and women. And I say young men and women because there is a certain image that people like to carry about what the victim of human trafficking looks like, but they come in all sizes, shapes, and genders, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a great point. I think a lot of people, we commonly hear the phrase mind your own business, but in nowadays, society, I think, don't mind your own business. Pay attention to what's going on to the people around you. And absolutely, take the time to care about what you're seeing around you and just checking in on people. It's such a little thing, but it goes a long way. It's the same thing about making a phone call here, right? You see something that, doesn't feel right to you, do the little thing, make the phone call, even if you're not sure. And that's exactly some of the stories I want to tell you about today, about these couple of winners of this award. If it's all right, I'd love to just kind of launch into a couple of their stories.
Oh my God, that would be perfect because that sets up what a nominee and what a winner looks like. So when people make their nominations, they have a better understanding of what it is you're looking for, but the kind of the vast examples of what it can be to be a hero or a heroine in this situation. Micah, without further ado, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jimmy. So the first story I'm going to tell is a very common one at TAT. We tell the story in most of our presentations, and it is a pretty horrific story, but the reason that we tell it is because this is truly an accurate depiction of what human trafficking looks like in our country. The two individuals in this story that were the perpetrators are named Laura Sorensen and Aldair Hadza. And in January of 2015, they pulled their RV into a Virginia truck stop, where police were quickly called to the scene. And when troopers asked to enter the vehicle, they immediately knew that something was wrong. Sorensen and Hadza were almost giddy with law enforcement, over answering their questions, offering the officers cookies, and even insisting that they sit down and just relax. This is just not normal behavior for somebody who is being investigated by the police. And there was a third person in the RV. She wasn't talking. Her hair was pulled up into a greasy bun on top of her head. She was very pale and heavily made up with makeup. But most importantly, she kept her eyes down and she wouldn't look anybody in the eye. And at one point during the conversation with law enforcement, Sorensen and Hadza actually pointed out of the front of the RV to a local landmark that they said they wanted to visit later that day. And it was at that point that the young woman was able to look up, make a face, signaling to the officer nearest her that she needed help. And that's when she was removed from the RV. And when she got outside with that officer, that's when she began to tell her horrific story. She was a 20-year-old woman who had been kidnapped from her Iowa home weeks prior. And I say kidnapped, but I do think it's important to mention that she actually knew her kidnappers. They were friends of her sisters. She had been beaten, raped, and her entire body had been burned with instruments that were heated up on the RV stove. She had been branded, tortured, and at one point she had actually managed to get away until Sorensen and Hadza tracked her down, jammed nails into her feet so that she wouldn't be able to run away again. They were selling her through Craigslist ads that they were posting of her, and then men were coming out to the RV and raping her. She had not eaten in a week. She could not remember the last time that she had had anything to drink. And at that point, she felt as though she were going to die. And doctors actually said that if the call to law enforcement had not been made that day, that she probably would have died shortly thereafter due to the malnutrition and the torture that she suffered. But there was a gentleman at the truck stop that day in January of 2015 that saw the RV and saw a young woman's head poke out of the back of the window and felt as though she were pulled back rather quickly and the curtains were shut. And he, after seeing that, really just thought about how that did not feel right to him. Wasn't sure what he was seeing, but it was just a gut thing based upon what he saw. Recognized those red flags and called the hotline and law enforcement, and that's when law enforcement showed up. She was able to make a full recovery, and she's now at home getting the care and the love that she needs. And she called Kevin from her hospital room and told him that he was her guardian angel. And Kevin just said, no, ma'am, I'm a trucker against trafficking. So, Kevin Kimmel is one of our, it's just, like I said, it's a story we tell in a lot of our presentations. And we actually have a video on Kevin and his story that goes a little bit more in detail. And if you want to find more information about that, you can always go to our website at www.tatnonprofit.org. And then a story of more of a recent winner. We have Joe Aguayo, who is a professional truck driver with Winco Foods, and he was our 2023 Harriet Tubman Award winner. So in September of 2022, Joe was driving in a remote area of the country known for its hot springs and its lack of cell phone service. And as he was driving around a curve, he saw something that he knew was wrong right away. It was a young woman whose head was completely shaved. She was looking up at the mountains, and she was wearing nothing but a beach towel. So while obeying an explicit company policy prohibiting unapproved riders from the cab, he continued driving until he saw the next roadside police call box. And once he did, he pulled over, he called law enforcement, gave her description and the location that he was at, and then just continued on. And then a few months later, Joe was driving the same route again and ended up having a weather-related accident. And as he was conversing with law enforcement on the scene, he inquired if the officer actually knew what happened to the woman he had seen a few months prior. And to Joe's surprise, the trooper who was assisting him with the accident had also ended up assisting with the woman, and was amazed to be reunited with the person who had placed the call for help. So it turns out that the young woman was a 27-year-old victim of human trafficking who had been drugged and then dumped in that location. She was in really rough shape, and the trooper was able to transport her to a hospital where she was able to make a full recovery. The trooper told Joe that he had likely saved that woman's life because had he waited until his own cell phone had service again instead of using the call box, her story probably likely would have ended very differently. And it's because of these actions that Tat was very proud to name Joe our 2023 Harriet Tubman Award winner. So, you can kind of sense a theme here. These two guys saw something. They thought, you know what? I recognize these red flags from my training, and I think this is the opportunity to make a call, and that's exactly what they did. And just look at the massive impact between such a simple thing, which is just call. Call the hotline, call 911, let them know, hey, I think I've seen something that just doesn't feel right, and I would like for you to check it out. And then these two young people, their lives are completely turned around because of it.
Let me, Micah, really quickly, let me just say something, too. There's a little detail in that story that you pointed out that is a great reminder to people about how interconnected all of this is. The fact that the trooper and the trucker ended up meeting again is a great reminder about creating associations. Is that the idea that one of the that by not being lonely on the road, by being a human being and interacting with people, what ends up happening is you end up making connections. By actually following policy, a lot of people would say, well, I'm going to pull over right now. Truckers got to think about their safety, because I can think of a whole bunch of great ways to entrap a trucker in a bad situation. But
absolutely.
But literally to follow the protocol that you guys have laid out to both ensure the safety of the men and women behind the wheel while stepping in to also help these young men and women in terrible harm's way. It's just a matter of noticing it, having the training to understand what you've seen, and to take action. And and let's say that she wasn't a victim of human trafficking. Let's say that she had been a schizophrenic. He's still doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's still stepping in and making a difference in a person's life. It creates the safest sort of infrastructure of emotional reaction to allow everyone's safety to be guaranteed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like you said, there's a lot of scenarios here where a pimp or a trafficker could be absolutely nearby, and the situation might not necessarily be safe for that caller. We always like to encourage people, don't get directly involved if you think that there's any sort of chance of danger. That's why we want you to call the hotline number. We want you to call 911 and have the professionals come in and do their jobs, And every cop I've ever talked to always says, we would rather you make a call. Even if you're not sure, even if you think that there's a chance that you're wrong, make that call so that we can come in, do our jobs, and make the determination for ourselves.
That's the other thing, too, is the fact that even if you're wrong, look, and as somebody who used to work in law enforcement, I can say this too. Sometimes people get pulled over and a couple of questions get asked, and this is one of those moments where if nothing actually is wrong, if it's a disaffected teenager in the back of a car who is giving her dad and mom a lot of grief, there are trained law enforcement professionals who can recognize that. Mm-hmm. That's the other thing too, because getting yourself involved in that kind of stuff directly, trying to be a quote-unquote man of action, woman of action hero can often have disastrous results, whereas if you let the law enforcement, let them know what's going on and where it is, they can be like, hey, we got a couple of questions for you, and it turns out that Janie's in the back being a bit of a brat. They will be on their merry way as if nothing happened. It's the whole thing is to work with the people who are the actual professionals, to get the training from TAT and to work with those people. And I think it's important too, and I realize I'm belaboring this point, is that these men did nothing more, and it's a lot, than simply follow the protocol and the training that you guys have gave them, and they set off a domino sequence that led to the rescue and liberation of a young soul.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's thanks to the training that they had, and if anybody out there is curious about the training that we have or wants to know more, TAT not only has training for over-the-road truck drivers, but we also have training for local drivers as well. And maybe you're not even a driver and you're just listening and you're thinking, how can I help? We have a corporate video that we just released that's fantastic, that displays different red flags and situations and stories that even you in your regular job could take and apply to your life. And so I would definitely, say anybody who's interested in learning anything more, definitely go to our website at www.tatnonprofit.org. To find out how you can step up and do more.
Really quickly, so let's go through the nomination process. Like I said, this is not this is not high. This is not complicated. This is not like a lot of heavy lifting. It's just a matter of once again going through the sequence and figuring out what the qualifications are, how we go about doing this. So take us through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think that you have a story similar to Kevin or to Joe's, we want you to go to our website. And then submit a nomination for either yourself, your story, or another individual story. And then TAT will work with law enforcement, of course, to vet that story, go through the facts, and see if we can get as much factual information surrounding that story. Because obviously, these stories are important enough that we want to vet these nominations as thoroughly as possible. And then at that point, it comes down to TAT and law enforcement selecting which winner we think deserves the award the most throughout the year. And like I said, these awards nominations will close at the end of July. So please, if you think you have a story similar to Kevin or to Joe's, or you think you know somebody who might talk to that person, let them know about the opportunity to present and submit a nomination so that we can potentially honor them by gifting them this prestigious award.
Okay, Micah, I want to take a moment here because we're on a new platform. We're in a new format.
Yeah.
We got a whole bunch of groovy stuff going on here. We've also got a whole bunch of new listeners. We've actually been looking at our numbers on Facebook and on YouTube and a whole bunch of the other platforms we're at. And while we got a lot of old friends taking the ride who know you, know what you guys do, have a comprehensive sense, I also want to make sure that each one of our longtime guests and friends gets a chance to really kind of explain what it is you do and how it is you do it. So a little bit of an origin story for yourself would be great if you want to share anything about yourself, but also about Truckers Against Trafficking in general. So wherever you'd like to begin with that, we got a few minutes to kind of do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. And by the way, congratulations on the new format on your guys' new show. I mean, I'm a long-time collaborator with you guys on Dave Nemo, but also a fan. So I'm excited for you guys in this new journey. So yeah, but absolutely great point. TAT, or Truckers Against Trafficking, as we were once known as, is a 501c3 international nonprofit organization that is just working to raise up and mobilize an army of transportation professionals whose primary goal is to aid law enforcement in the recognition and the reporting of the crime of human trafficking. So this, in essence, would aid in the recovery of victims, but then also help perpetrators behind bars. So we provide industry-specific training, as I mentioned, completely free of charge. And if any of you out there are an owner-operator, or you have your own trucking, bus, or energy company of any size, we'd love for you to utilize our free training. And if you're not the owner and you just want your company to get involved, same thing. Send us an email, give us a call. We'd love to discuss with you more ways that your organization could get involved with this life-saving training. But we work within a ton of different sectors. We started as trucking, and that was in our name, of course, and that is how we got our start. But we're really so much more than that now. We recognize the importance of the busing and the energy industries. And so, like I said, we have specific training materials and videos specific to those fronts now, including a training video specific to school bus drivers. So, if you as a listener from wherever you're based are thinking, man, I'd love to get school bus, driver training out to my local public school systems, again, give us a call, send us an email. We'd be more than happy to set you up with that information on how you can get started with that. TAT has expanded into Canada. We've replicated our model into Mexico. We've greatly expanded our state agency initiatives and law enforcement trainings. We're working with leadership at the state level in all 50 states. We've grown our shipping partners program absolutely tremendously. And most recently, we have created a training video for local drivers and in-home delivery personnel, but then also that corporate video I was telling you about as well. So lots of different material for people to absorb and to learn from and learn with. But hopefully, that view of everything I just described kind of gives the listener an idea of the width and the depth of our work across North America. We work, like I said, trucking, energy, bus, transit, truck stops, local drivers, school transportation, law enforcement, government agencies, dealership, anything that has to do with transportation, we work with across the country.
And the other thing that I love is the fact that it's an ongoing conversation that really, at the end of the day, the way movements like this get started is a group of people get to talking, and then they kind of figure out the common language. Everybody kind of figures out, look, we've got to get on the same page about what we're seeing so that when we talk to each other, we can shorten the conversation more and more and more to actually have other conversations, friendship conversations, fellowship conversations, those kind of conversations. But the idea is to really kind of reduce this to a shorthand so that people recognize what they're looking at and understand the strategies of which they're kind of engaging in. I was kind of curious, though, how do you get involved in all of this, Micah, without getting too prying?
Yeah.
What's your origin story with Truckers Against Trafficking? I asked Kevin Lindsay on Maintenance Matters to tell us his story, and he was like, wait, we're going to talk about me? I'm like, yep, we're going to talk about you. So what's happening with you now?
Yeah. I've been with TAT for a little over 2 years now. And when I had heard that there was an opening at the company, I was definitely curious. But what I was shocked to find out was how little I actually knew personally about human trafficking existing in the modern day age. And as I was getting prepared for my interviews, I read a couple of books on human trafficking, and right then and there was so shocked that it still happened to the extent that it does, that I was like, listen, job or not, my wife and I will probably contribute through tithes, donation, to some sort of anti-human trafficking cause, throughout the rest of our lives, because this is just so crazy, because you hear about it and you think, yeah, for sure, it definitely still happens. But some of the books I read, they went through the statistics. One of the books that I read was, recounts of survivors, the horrific things that they went through at the time that they were trafficked. And I just could not believe that somebody could do this to another human being. I was just shocked. And then when you look at some of the statistics, as of course I ended up getting the job. Again, it just further shocks me more. There are over 50 million victims of modern day slavery, whether that's through sex trafficking or labor trafficking. It's a $236 billion criminal activity. It's happening in all 50 states, including Washington, D.C. Thousands of children are at risk of being trafficked in the United States every single year. And that, victims of human trafficking are disproportionately women and girls of color. And one of the statistics is that a victim of human trafficking may be forced to have sex up to 20 times a day. It's just like,
It's brutal. And by the way, let me show you how much
Yeah.
headway you guys have actually ended up making. How much headway you guys are making. That the go-to villain now in most television and movie police procedurals constantly is always human traffickers, and that's a
Right.
good thing. Which means that the public awareness of this continues to grow. Continues to grow at an exponential rate, so that more and more people are becoming aware of this problem, which means more and more people need to become aware of TAT, so they actually understand, as non-law enforcement, how they can actually get involved and make a difference. Because the one thing we don't want to see is a gunfight in a parking lot. That doesn't end well for anybody. We want people to understand all you're doing is buying time for the people who are really experienced in this to get to the scene and do what it is they do so well.
Yeah, I gotta agree. I think it's great that in movies and media and television that it's becoming more of a human trafficker. Yeah, I've seen a couple of things where that's there, and hopefully it gets that conversation people started for people, and they can go and actually look up and see what is human trafficking in real life outside of a Hollywoodized version of what this looks like, and get more information on it, and potentially be able to do something or take a training that might, affect somebody's life. Like I said, all it took was a phone call.
By the way, couldn't have picked a better name for the award. By the way, Harriet Tubman, another, as Lindsay likes to say, another badass American, simply standing up for the little people of the earth and making sure that they have a safe place to get to. At the end of the day, it's like Hemingway said, all one needs is really a clean, well-lighted place, and that in and of itself can get somebody home back to the people they love. Micah, it's a pleasure having you on your first appearance here on Road Gang Radio. A big hello from Dave Nemo, who just texted me. A big hello, of course,
fantastic.
from big hello from our good friend Phone Master Dre, Lindsay Lawler, and everybody. You're welcome back anytime. You're doing the Lord's work. You're doing the grace work. You're doing the quiet notes of decency work. Thank you, Micah.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it, and of course, it's a blessing to be on. We appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much. TAT, of course, is making a difference everywhere. You can make a difference, too. You can check out all their socials on our website. They're one of the causes that we support. We're going to take a quick break here. We're going to come back with the Braz. It's going to be the first edition of Tech Talk with Robert Braswell. We'll be back after these messages. It's Road Gang Radio, #RGR. Join the resistance. TAT's a part of the resistance.